Hello, welcome to another edition of Cracking Cryptic. The eagle-eyed amongst you might have spotted a video we did earlier on the Telegraph crossword today, but unfortunately we had a bit of a computer issue and there was no sound on the video, so we've taken it down and we're going to take a quick look at the times instead. Now, this is an interesting puzzle I thought today, not too difficult, so definitely one to have a crack at if you're maybe not that experience with the times crossword, because I think there was some possibilities to make progress. I'm not going to run through every clue, I'm just going to talk about some of the things I noticed as I solved. Now, one across speaks about pantomime but not popular musical. Now, there are a couple of ways of getting into this clue, and you remember that I always recommend trying to spot instructional words in clues, because that can give you a chance to spot which side of the clue, the beginning or the end of the clue, is going to be the definition. So there are two chances here, because you've got the word about there. Obviously if you put one word about another word, that would seem to be indicative of wordplay. And also the phrase here, but not popular. Now, popular is so commonly used to hint at the word in crosswords, because obviously if something is in, it is fashionable or popular, that whenever I see expressions like but not popular, I'm immediately keying in on trying to remove in from something. Here we're being told to remove in from a pantomime, and I'm sure your knowledge of pantomimes is more extensive than mine, but it didn't take me very long to think of Aladdin as a possible pantomime. And once you think of that, you've almost solved the clue, because the double D there is so helpful. As I say, the words or the expression speaks about is seemingly saying we need to put a word for speaks around the side of our AL double D construction, and the only way of doing that, given this is a 5/4 enumeration, would be like that you couldn't, otherwise we're shifting a double D into this second word, and that's obviously not going to work. So can we think of a musical that fits this pattern? Well, even if you're not familiar with the musical, I think it's not too difficult at this point to come up with the correct answer. What you shouldn't do is what I did, which is to solve, before I solved one across, I solved 5 down. Former region of England, I saw this was 6 letters. I almost didn't think about the rest of the clue at all, and I wrote in Wessex. Now, I then glanced at the rest of the clue and I saw the expression goes over it. Now, it in crosswords is very often referring to sex, because if you do it, you have sex. So this looked like exactly the right answer to me, and I maybe spent 1 second convincing myself that Wes was a South American name. I think I'd heard of Wes Anderson, and yeah, it just seemed, yeah, well, that sounds like a name from the southern part of America. Wessex is right. So when I came to this clue, even when I had this construction, I was thinking of words like draw here, and it took me a few seconds, which are valuable in this sort of crossword, to figure out that in fact I needed to be thinking of Sussex here as being the former county, which I think now is split up into East Sussex and West Sussex, which is why it's just a former county. And then we can of course get salad days at one across. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about today is what does a question mark mean? Now, there are a few clues in today's puzzle that had a question mark. 9 across has a question mark. 3 down, is that the one with the question mark? Yeah, let's look at this one first. I think this is probably the most typical use of a question mark. Let's think about what it's doing. So, nuts removed from available selection, question mark. Now, I think it's fair to say that normally the bit of the clue that precedes the question mark is probably not the definition, because a question mark most often is indicating some sort of pun, and it's not always going to be the case that the bit before the question mark isn't going to be the definition, but because setters like to use question marks to indicate things of a punny nature, quite often you'll find the definition elsewhere. So here we needed a word that means nuts. Now obviously that could mean nuts as in things you eat, but quite often it would mean nuts as in mental or deranged, which is the answer. So what is this question mark doing? Well, here it's indicating that if you were to remove something from a range, i.e. from the range of goods that you sell, for example, you could, in a punny sense, describe them as being deranged. Now obviously if you look up deranged in the dictionary, you will not find this definition as a valid one, and that is why the question mark is needed. It's indicating that this would be a funny, amusing, alternative way of reading the answer. Now let's contrast that with 9 across, where we have another question mark here. Let down was blooming female going AWOL. Now the question mark here serves a different purpose. It's required because the surface reading of the clue is actually a question. So this is one thing you have to watch out for. Here the question mark may not be indicating anything of a punny nature. It may simply be required grammatically. So was blooming female going AWOL is a question, and therefore there's a question mark in the clue. Here what you needed to do was to come up with an 8-letter word that means was blooming, and if you could come up with the word flowered there, we could remove F from that, F being a valid abbreviation for female, we would get lowered, which of course means let down. So here question mark's doing something different. So we've got 27 across. Very wet day likely to be experienced by the entire family, question mark. So again, using my sort of broad brush rule of trying to look at the other end of the clue for the definition, here we'd probably be looking for a word that means very wet. Day, well, day can, I think, be abbreviated to D, but I don't think you'd often see that in the Times crossword. You'd see that more in the listener crossword because it's quite an unusual abbreviation. So much more often when you see the word day, you'll be looking at one of the abbreviations for the days of the week. So mun, chew, wed, THU for Thursday, FRI, sat, which is what's required here, or sun. So sat, we need a word that means very wet. It doesn't take long to come up with saturated. So how does the rest of the clue work? Well, it's a cinema reference. So if something could be experienced by the entire family, it would be U-rated at the cinema. And that's why the question mark's there. It's indicating it's sort of an amusing definition. And I think that's probably my favourite clue in the puzzle, actually, because likely to be experienced by the entire family, question mark for U-rated is very innovative and clever. Now, are there any other clues with question marks? I think there were 1 or 2. Let's just see if we can find them. Oh, here. Might nylon garments need shortening? So again, here we've got the surface reading of the clue is a question itself, and here we need a word that means might, and you can see there in the words nylon garments, you can see the expression long arm. It's in the long arm of the law, so it's in the power of the law, I guess. So if we shorten nylon garments, we can get long arm, which is the answer. The question mark there again is just serving a grammatical reading of the surface of the clue. Now, medical procedure poorer than all the others, question mark. Well, let me give you a couple of letters from this one. We could have a K, I think, an N, an E, and a T. So we need to come up with, here we need a medical procedure. It's not too hard to figure out. The second word is probably going to be test, and then, well, there's only really one option, I'd argue. So skin test is the answer, and skintist. If you were the most skint person, then you would be, or could be, described as the skintist, poorer than all the others, question mark. Now, why is there a question mark there? I think it's because it's acknowledging that skintist is it's a very little used adjective, if it indeed is a valid adjective. I mean, it's not like shortest, where clearly shortest would be a valid superlative form. Skintist, maybe this is you can be the most skint. It's one of those adjectives that is perhaps a little bit difficult to convince yourself it has a superlative form. I haven't checked, but I'm not sure whether skint means absolutely broke, in which case if it's an absolute, can you have a comparative or a superlative form of it? I'm not sure. It's like being, you know, the most unique or the most perfect. You wouldn't see perfectist as a valid superlative. But anyway, so that's what I think that question mark's doing here. It's saying this is quite an unusual form, superlative form, and therefore the setter has acknowledged that by putting the question mark in. I found another one, 7 down. So here my broad brush rule doesn't work. So accommodating way to deal with shares. In fact, the whole clue here is acting as the definition. And the word accommodating is sort of saying that when we find the answer, we may be able to read the answer as you know, in a different way, as referring to accommodation in some sense. Now, those of you familiar with buying and selling shares over year end, for example, may have come across the term bed and breakfasting. So bed and breakfast is the answer here. Now, bed and breakfasting in the sense of buying and selling shares has obviously absolutely nothing to do with you know, hoteliers and staying in paid accommodation, etc. But that's why the question mark is necessary. When you look at this clue, you see bed and breakfast, you immediately might think, oh yeah, it's referring to you know, going on holiday somewhere and having your bacon and eggs, and therefore the question mark's required. It's basically saying this clue is a pun, and so quite interesting actually when we go through it. We've actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clues actually that required or had a question mark. A couple required for the surface reading, and the others all requiring it because the setter liked to make use of a pun. And as I say, saturated was my favourite clue for that reason. So something a bit different today. I'm going to be back again soon with another edition of Cryptic, Cryptic, and thanks for watching. If you do like videos, please do subscribe to the channel. We appreciate it, and we're trying to grow our subscriber base, so any help you can give us would be really welcome. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.